I'm delighted to welcome Stacy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Roger. My name is Stacy Scott, and I am the Accessibility Manager for Taylor and Francis Publishing.
Excellent. Stacy, you work for a large global publisher, and I wondered if you might say something about the company and its commitment to accessibility.
Absolutely. So I have to say that so many publishers are turning their heads towards accessibility and the need to make their content inclusive for everybody. And Taylor and Francis, for whom I work, is one of these publishers. That was one of the things that attracted me to go and work for Taylor and Francis. uh, their commitment to accessibility, as far as I'm concerned, at the moment is second to none. And they were very far ahead in their understanding of how important it is to make their content accessible, but also their systems and the whole journey for a student. So, for example, in 2021, when I joined, they had just won the Accessible Books Consortium Gold Standard Award, alongside achieving the 100% Aspire score for their corporate accessibility statement. And what that statement does is it tells customers, users, librarians, students, anyone that needs to know, it tells them what does Taylor and Francis do across its platforms, across its content, in order to facilitate accessibility. And the rate of that accessibility statement is measured quite highly on how simple is it to understand the information and how easy is it to get what you need. So something like, for example, well, if I need a book converted, where do I go? Do I have to jump through 100 hoops, or is there an email address on that accessibility statement? So things like that, Taylor and Francis paid a lot of attention to making sure that it was very clear on how users could get hold of books in alternative formats, and that gave them the 100% Aspire score. They also had a very strong mission to make their journals accessible. And for anyone who is a student and who has had to navigate the world of journals, I think anyone with a vision impairment or a print impairment would agree that it's a minefield, and it's very, very difficult. So Taylor and Francis currently have a growing collection of 360,000 journals that they have now made into fully accessible EPUBs, so that they can be navigated by somebody using text-to-speech software, for example. And they are looking into a program of making sure that as many journals as possible will have image descriptions going forward as well. um, that image description work continues across their work in terms of books as well, and making sure that as much content as possible will have descriptions. They're actually piloting a project where they are working closely with their authors so that their authors can provide the image description. And one of the key reasons for this is because a lot of the content is very bespoke, it's very specific, and sometimes, it's titles that I can't even understand, never mind read the book. And so having an author who understands the particular diagram, flow chart, whatever it may be, can be the difference between that description making sense and it not at all. So having authors contribute is a big project for Taylor and Francis at the moment, and it's just started, but we are seeing a lot of engagement, and it's something that we plan to ramp up in the coming months/years. The final thing I would add is just Taylor and Francis's dedication to making sure that, as I mentioned earlier on the accessibility statement, there is an email address that you can contact if you need to request a book in an alternative format. And Taylor and Francis have a commitment to respond to that query satisfactorily within a maximum of 3 days. And again, that can be the difference, as a lot of us know, between sitting there for days, weeks, or indeed even months waiting on that book that we need until the exams passed, and we weren't able to even attend it. So I think it's certainly Taylor and Francis. For me, it was a very attractive prospect to go and engage in all that work, and the enthusiasm and the dedication for inclusivity and accessibility.
Before joining Taylor and Francis, you were with RNIB looking after its Bookshare and Talking Books operation. What attracted you to that position?
Well, education for everybody has always been a goal of my career, and before that, I worked in a lot of global countries across the world, basically, sort of Bangladesh, India, and across Africa, to get making sure that people with visual impairments and sight loss had access to education. And so when I was given the opportunity to work for the RNIB to continue that work, it certainly it fitted in with my raison d'etre, if you like, to continue that work. RNIB Bookshare it looked like quite a challenge, I have to say, because what we were saying was we have a platform that we own and we're running through Benetech software, and we'd like publishers to basically just give us all your books so that we can make them accessible. And it seemed like quite an impossible request at the time, but it seemed so important to me for that to happen. And RNIB had started this work, and I was really keen to continue it. I was also really keen, to be honest, to have somebody taking on this work who had lived experience of sight loss as I do, because I'd gone to university and I'd struggled because I didn't have access to any of my content in accessible form, or if I did, it took weeks to get it, all of that stuff that anyone with a visual impairment will absolutely understand. And so being able to have the chance to build something like Bookshare, where we could have publishers put their books on a platform where they could then be available in a variety of different formats, it was just an absolute game changer. And I later actually took on a course and did a bit of studying whilst I was working there, and so I got to use RNIB Bookshare in I guess a student capacity, and it was amazing. It was so different to my experience at university, and it just drove me on to do it even more and get even more books in. And I think by the end, I think we partnered, it was myself and a wonderful team that I worked with, and we partnered with about 1,100 publishers, and I think the book count was 750,000 and growing. And again, this shows the dedication that I mentioned earlier that publishers have to making their content accessible to people as well.
So when you started in that role, did you have any thoughts as to how provision could be developed, or was that something which really developed over time?
I think a lot of ideas came through, colleagues at RNIB that had been there for a long time and who had a phenomenal amount of expertise, but also accessibility champions and partnering bodies who worked alongside us and gave us a lot of support in terms of what we needed to do. We worked a lot with universities, colleges, schools, because RNIB Bookshare was open to everyone. So we had 3-year-olds at nursery school reading books straight through to adults studying further and higher education. And so we really used customers and stakeholders to help build on our knowledge and decide what provision that we needed. And there was certainly a lot to learn when I started, and because I'd never heard of an EPUB really before I started, if I'm honest. So it was a very intense but wonderful journey, and there was a lot of people involved, and it continues even now, and it's just a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm. PDF content is one of those areas which certainly can be an issue for provision of accessible materials. Did you observe a trend to try to reduce this?
Really interesting, because as most people will be aware, that there are several versions of the Bookshare platform around the world. So you have RNIB Bookshare, which is in the UK, which is the Bookshare that we're discussing now. But there's also Bookshare in the US. Now, Bookshare in the US don't take PDFs at all. They only deal with EPUBs. And so when we wanted to build RNIB Bookshare, it was very clear from the work that we'd done, from the exploratory investigations and conversations, that we needed to include PDF. And so that was one of our key builds into RNIB Bookshare, because it seems that the people in the UK were still and in some ways are still very much wedded to PDF. Certainly from my perspective, as a text-to-speech user, I'm absolutely not. I love to avoid them, but each to their own. I think a lot of it is that, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't know what an EPUB was when I started. And so, when we're talking to teachers and staff members and Senkos, and we're saying to them, well, actually, EPUB is so much more accessible and it's easier. And they're saying, "Oh, we don't have time to learn. We know what a PDF is, so can we just have it in PDF?" And I think that's something that we absolutely have to understand and respect, that they don't have a lot of time. And although there's a lot of information out there, it doesn't take a huge amount of time to learn about EPUBs. It does take a little bit of time, and I think that most people would agree that time is something that teachers and support staff and QTVIs and everyone that supports people in the classroom, time is just not something they have enough of. We did, in order to sort of bridge that gap and make sure that people had access to both, we partnered with Dolphin Easy Reader, and that made a huge difference, because they made available on their platform the ability to open both EPUBs and PDFs. And so that's available on any mobile phone, really, iPhone and Androids and laptops and tablets and Kindles and so many different pieces of technology, and that made a huge difference as well, because it actually meant that the students themselves could actually start to explore that. So they had the access to PDFs, but actually they started to look at EPUBs, and we started to have conversations with students at various fairs and events and things, and we would show them EPUBs, and they say, oh yes, we've seen these on Dolphin Easy Reader, and so we were then behind, because the students had they'd got the jump on us. So I think things are now starting to turn towards EPUB, because it is the more accessible format, but I think it will still take time to to train everyone in how to quickly and best access that.
Yeah. So looking at the wider landscape of publishing in the UK, you are chair of the Accessibility Action Group of the Publishers Association. Could you say something about the work of the group and outcomes for publishers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, I would say that the thing that's really great about the Accessibility Action Group is it's a very harmonious and collaborative space where publishers are of one mind and one goal, which is to make content accessible and available for everybody despite their reading requirements. And it's also I call it a safe space, which I think is really important because it's a place where publishers can ask questions that perhaps they would feel nervous asking in another environment. So it could be something like, what terminology do we use to describe somebody with a visual impairment or dyslexia or something like that? And actually I think a lot of people find it quite difficult to ask those questions because they want to say the right thing. They don't want to offend. And so, the Accessibility Action Group allows questions like that as well. It can be questions from that to how do we make an EPUB accessible? What components does it need to have? We also have we collaborate on other little projects within the group to look at a variety of different things that'll be coming up. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to, probably not allowed. If I'm not sure, then I shouldn't share a couple of things that we're working on now. But there's a few things coming up that we're looking at and looking at that, making alterations and hopefully making things easier to understand. We'll put together webinars and seminars and come together to make sure that we can distribute that understanding. And it's a really great collaborative space. And I would just say, anybody is welcome to the Accessibility Action Group, and that very much includes people with lived experience. We want people from with visual impairments to come along. We want people from the dyslexia space to say, this is what I need. This is what I need you to be thinking about. And so it's very much an open space where we can share the work that we all want and that goal to make content inclusive and fully accessible.
With all the excellent work being undertaken by publishers, do you know if they have any mechanisms to track who and how many customers are using their accessible books?
It's difficult to say for each publisher, but certainly from a Bookshare perspective, when I worked for Bookshare UK and I worked a lot with Bookshare US as well, publishers would very frequently have download reports so that they would be able to see how many people were actually accessing the content that they were putting down. So, for example, just to look at, if we pick three, so if we look at RNIB Bookshare, Bookshare US, and Access Tech Network, and we look at the Taylor and Francis numbers, so those three partnerships processed over 57,000 downloads in 2021 alone, and that was across over 36,000 individual titles. They also processed 2,176 requests through the VIP program, which is the mailbox that I was talking about earlier, and again that's in 2021. And then since 2010, they've processed over 28,000 requests through that mailbox as well in just the past 11 years. So it's It's a lot of books, it's a lot of content, and it shows that actually the work that they're doing, and you know, this is Taylor and Francis, but also any other publisher that looked at the download numbers, that asked us for quotes, that spoke to us about, you know, what are people saying, how are people using our content. We were always engaged in conversations about either figures or how can we make things better, who's using our content, what can we do to make it more accessible. it there was a lot of engagement in terms of making sure that the numbers were there and also that the quality was there as well.
So are you aware if publishers reach out to customers to gain feedback and learn what the provision means and what difference it makes to people's lives?
Yes, certainly. There's not just publishers, but publishers and anyone involved in the sector. I know we have had so many conversations, and this is from our IB Bookshare as well, saying, you know, we really want to know, we want to hear from the customer's voice. You know, how are they finding the content? Is it what they need? But it's proven really difficult, if I'm being honest, to actually get the feedback. And certainly very recently, Taylor and Francis put out a call to say, you know, we'd love to hear your feedback, and you know, we didn't really get many responses, and R&IB Bookshare had exactly the same over you know, the 4 or 5 years that I worked there. We would do it all the time, and we had a, you know, please contact us box on the homepage, and we did get some really wonderful feedback, but we really had to sort of reach out to people that we'd built connections with in order to get it. To be honest, part of that could just be that, you know, if you're a student, you know, say you're 18, you know, you're down the pub and you're having a pint after a, you know, a long day studying. You're not on Twitter going, how am I going to feed back to Bookshare or Taylor and Francis or one of the other publishers? So I don't know what incentive we could
Mm.
we could provide, but
Yeah.
it's definitely worth one thinking about.
Yes, yes, indeed. If you were to look into the future a few years ahead, is there anything you would like to see happening which is currently not, or are there other developments?
Definitely. So I don't want to bore people with too much technical speak, so I'll say a very little part about metadata. So metadata being the sort of the contents of a book in terms of the identifiers of a book. So the title, the author, ISBN, synopsis, these things that tell us what a book is and what it's about. That metadata included in that needs to have the accessibility metadata. So it needs to tell us, okay, does this book have descriptions? Does it have image descriptions? Does it conform to standards for accessible publications? All of these things. Does it have headings, hierarchical headings? Everything that makes it accessible, that needs to be seen in the metadata. And then part two of that is that metadata then needs to be discoverable. So say you were on a website for a large publisher and you typed in, and I don't know, you were searching for a medical book or a medical journal, and it came up and it said, oh, okay, yep, there's 443 versions of that book that you're looking for. That's not going to tell you the accessible version that you need. It's going to take you a long time to read 443 to find the one that has the image descriptions that you need in it. So we really want to see more publishers, more aggregators, more platforms engaging with accessible metadata, making sure that it's part of the spec when they're building that metadata, but also when the platform is putting out the book, that accessible metadata is included so that it can be searchable, so that you can tick a box and say, okay, I only want to see the books or the journals that are accessible for me. and I think that is something that's starting to happen, but it's got a long way to go. And so I would love to see it where that was the norm. That was something that, you know, we were talking about in the distant past. Um, I would say the second thing, I mean, there's several things, but the second thing that would be key to me is image descriptions. You know, I think we could all agree that there is absolutely no point in studying a subject and reading a book if it then says, and the most important thing, if you take anything away from this lesson or this book for your exam, is this diagram here. This chart here is the main thing that you need to know. And that chart just says image, because that's all it's going to say if you're using text to speech, and it has no description at all. And I think, you know, it's not just about access to education, because if you're visually impaired, then it's going to be so much more difficult for you to go out and get a job. In terms of, you can't just say, well, okay, I'm you know, I didn't do well in school, that's absolutely fine, but I'll go and work in a bar, or I'll build my own business, or I'll charter boats, or whatever it may be. Those options aren't open to a lot of blind and visually impaired people. And so education becomes even more important. And it's also about choice. Everybody has the choice to engage in an education and have access to an education, and certainly they should, on a global level, which is a whole other topic. But having that choice is, it for me, education is a privilege, but it is also very much a right. And that includes every aspect of it, from reading to being able to understand all the images and diagrams that go with that.
Yes, indeed. So coming to the final question, I just wonder if you could just briefly go through the various options out there available for reading various platforms and equipment for accessing them. I know that could be quite a few webinars,
Oh
but
wow, yes.
just a brief overview, because it's very easy to think, oh well, we all know that you can use your
Yes.
Kindle or whatever, but there, there may be some who just do not. So a brief canter around that one would be useful.
Absolutely. So you know, we can start from your very basic. You know, we can have a normal size book and take a magnifier, and that may be all somebody needs, or CCTV. But there's several bits of kit out there now that will allow you to enlarge the content of a book. If that's not suitable, there's also enlargement software on PC, on tablets. Most devices nowadays they have accessibility built in. We call it born accessible. So whether you turn on a PC, a Mac, an iPhone, an Android, they will all come with built-in technology to enable you to read your content. So that could be text to speech, or it could be magnification. So then we could look at PDFs, which we've spoken about, or EPUBs, which again is it's just a format that is a lot more user friendly, because it has a hierarchy of contents, it has accessible headings, and a whole host of other attributes to make it accessible. If that's not your thing, then talking books has become so mainstream that there are very few that you can't get now, and that's building into the future, because a lot of publisher revenue now comes from talking books, and so putting on a talking book and finding the one you want can be very, very simple. And that now can come from, I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? If we think about, 10 years we didn't have this, and now you can have your talking mobile phone, and you can download a variety of different programs, and you can listen to a talking book on RNIB talking books, or Audible, or you think, I can't be bothered getting my phone out my pocket, so actually I'm going to use my Amazon Echo device, and I'm just going to say, I actually, I'm going to say a word because I have one here, so I don't want it to talk back to us. You just say, play my book. And there you go. You don't even have to get off the sofa. You don't have to put down your cup of tea. You can just start playing an audiobook there and then. And there are so many options out there to suit user preference. And it's so wide ranging, depending on what you prefer. It's not restricting. It's not restrictive by age or by ability. There are just so many options, and I would really encourage anyone that wants to read to to talk to the RNIB, to talk to anyone that's associated with whatever print disability, to use a term that we're using now, but I'm sure will change going forward. You know, engage in those conversations, because I'm pretty sure there will be a solution for you. And if not, then we'd love to hear. We'd love to hear that there's not one for you, so that we can look into building one and make that another part of the goal going forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I'm wondering at this point whether we have any questions from our wonderful audience, our wonderful attendees.
In which other languages are books produced by Taylor and Francis, please?
It's a really good question. So Taylor and Francis are a global publisher, and so they have content in a vast variety of different languages. So a lot of European languages, but also we have a significant number in Mandarin, in Japanese, in Hindi. It's very, very global. So I would expect that it's the majority of languages, certainly across Europe, and as I mentioned, China and Japan.
Thank you. We have another question, Susan. Thank you.
Hi, Stacey. Thank you for a fabulous, some fabulous answers and information. Can I just ask you, what do you think can be done to encourage other publishers to further embrace accessible publishing?
Thank you, Susan. Hi there.
Hi.
I think a big part of it is I think some of them are already there, and we certainly see this from the Accessibility Action Group. But one of the there's a lot of struggles there. So some of them will say, well, the problem is we're really dedicated to it, but we don't have that ownership. We don't have somebody whose job it is to make sure that this happens. And so you tend to have some wonderful people doing it on top of a job that a full-time job that they already have. And so I would hope that Taylor and Francis have employed me full-time as the accessibility manager, and I know other publishers are looking into doing the same thing. There's also a lot of, because they collaborate a lot in terms of accessibility and inclusion. For example, in RNIB Bookshare, we would see a lot of cases where we would approach a publisher and we would say, we'd love you to work with us. And their first question would be, so who else works with you? Do you have any, big ones that work with you, that trust you? And we would say, well, absolutely. And we'd, reel off a dozen, and they'd say, oh, okay, well, if they are, we must as well. And so there's a lot of that, and I think that can be a really good thing, because it's showing other publishers that actually it can be done. It's not impossible, and there's that little competitive edge, isn't there? Because if X, Y, and Z are doing it, and you're a prominent publisher and you're not doing it, then the industry wants to know why, and they will ask why. And I can't think of a really good answer to that, and neither can they. And so I think we do see a lot of encouragement just by action.
Thank you. Oh, we've got one more question. Is that okay, Roger?
Yes, one more will be fine.
Okay, this is from Emma. What would you say has been your greatest achievement in accessible publishing, please?
Oh, what a lovely question. Thank you, Emma. Um, for me, I would say it was that when I mentioned being a student and using our NIB Bookshare and realizing how much easier it made things for me, and realizing that if it made it easier for me, that it made it easier for other people. And I think it was then that I realized that actually what we were doing, we weren't just gathering books onto a platform, we were changing the way that people with visual impairments accessed education, and in many ways we were enabling people with visual impairments to access education, and to be part of that for me was absolutely wonderful. And it's just something we wouldn't even have been talking about 5-10 years ago, and we were doing it, and we're doing it now, and it was just absolutely fantastic to have that realization.
Stacy, may I thank you so much for what you've been able to tell us in this webinar, for being with us and for talking about this topic so passionately. I know it means a lot to you, and I know it means a lot to many people, but thank you so much for what you've given us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and especially for those who give up their lunch hour to listen to me as well.
And thank you, Claire, also for the technical side of this. So this leaves me to mention our webinar on the 1st of March, when we will be joined by Sarah Hendren from the USA, who will be sharing thoughts about designing for accessibility and much more. If you want to come and find out perhaps new things, I think this could well be for you. So we look forward to seeing you all and in March and joining us. Thank you, and goodbye from us all.
Thanks, everyone.